Welcome to the Be What You Want podcast. My name is Chris Hall, your host, and today I've got the privilege of talking to Marcus Warner and Chris M Coursey. Now, these gentlemen have known each other for 10 years. They've got a really interesting background because not only are they married themselves, but they're both from the pastoral background, but also working in areas such as college professorship and all these things. And I'll do a bit of an introduction of them both now. But today we're going to talk about marriage and bringing joy back to marriage. Now, personally, I've been married for, my wife will kill me, I think 5 years now. and it really is, something that is so important to consciously talk about, because I remember saying I do, and what I do meant to me was commitment. So let me introduce the gents. Today we're going to talk about the commitment that we can bring towards making sure that joy exists in marriage. So Marcus Warner is the president of Deeper Walk International. He's a former pastor and a college professor who's written several topics on the books ranging from how to study the Bible to spiritual warfare. Wicked. Okay, so excuse the pun there, wicked. Do you see what I did? That was unintended. Emotional healing.
Not the first time I've heard that.
Right, it's pretty good. That came out. And leadership. Now, Chris M Coursey is an ordained minister, pastoral counsellor, published author, and an international speaker. He and his wife, Jen, lead and design the Thrive training program, and uses brain-based exercises to train leaders, families, and communities in the 19 relational skills. So Chris and his wife are passionate about helping people to acquire their skills to make relationships work. So between these two fine gentlemen, fascinating background across a range of subjects. And if you're interested in the work, we'll leave the links in the description below. But now let's get into joy and marriage and welcome both Marcus Warner and Chris M Coursey to the podcast.
Thank you, Chris. It's great to be with you. This is a new experience for us too. I don't think we've done an Australian interview before, so this is fun.
That's
awesome.
Right.
Awesome. Well, I always say to people, I've been in Australia for 10 years now. I was originally from England. And so now I'm both. I'm Brit-Australian.
I want to ask if that makes you better than others or like.
It's just some kind of weird it's a weird privilege that somehow seems to be carrying on, even though the British Empire is long dead. It's kind of like, Brits can just open their mouths and they sound whatever, intelligent or charming, Yep.
It's sort of a joke in America. It's like if you're a pastor with a Scottish accent, you're automatically smarter than everyone else. So it's like
it's true.
I relate to that. I think there's a guttural groundedness, and I mean,
yes. Exactly.
Well, so let's talk about. Look, in the Be What You Want podcast, we're non-denominational, non-religious. We kind of come from any background. We're very inclusive in terms of this is not meant to be aimed at either a Christian audience or any particular audience. We're just trying to tap into the distinctions here. Now, of course, you gentlemen have got your background from a Christian point of view. But let me open off with a question just to kind of hopefully make all listeners welcome. The principles that we're about to discuss in this podcast and your book. From your point of view, do these principles apply to anyone, whether they be religious, non-religious, atheistic, agnostic, whatever?
Yeah, that's a very fair question because, we do both come from pastoral backgrounds. This book was intentionally written on a brain science foundation to be applicable to anybody, regardless of faith or creed. Obviously, as Christians, we think there's some advantage to being a Christian and living these things out, but the principles themselves, I think, are grounded in just the way the brain operates and the way relationships operate.
Yeah. So, Chris, as long as everyone has a working brain, honestly, you can put this into practice today, and that's the beauty of this material. It's just really foundational for every human on this planet.
Well, and it's truly cross-cultural in the sense that every human brain operates on the same principles. Yeah. So it really doesn't matter if you're, from the outback or whether you're from, Paris or from America, human brain's still a human brain.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think, just to add to that, wisdom is wisdom, right? So we can get wisdom from all sorts of sources. Right. So look, I'm genuinely fascinated to hear about the wisdom that you've incorporated into the book. So I'd like to kind of contrast things by starting off with the problem. Marcus, let me ask you to start off. How and why can resentment start to appear and manifest within marriage?
That's a great question. We often teach the two most powerful forces in any relationship are resentment and appreciation. And so what happens is when appreciation attracts and resentment repels. So it's almost mathematical to the extent that the less appreciation there is in marriage, the more resentment builds. And so in our book, we talk about a joy gap in marriage, and that is that a joy gap is created by the space between moments of shared joy. And one of the best ways we share joy is by appreciation. So when that gap gets wide, like we just aren't having fun together, we aren't experiencing joy together anymore, as that gap gets wider, resentment is the natural thing that fills in there. Because we tend to, both resentment and fear are the most common things that fill that gap. So resentment is the feeling that you're not meeting expectations, that I'm not being treated fairly, that I'm having problems now that are your fault. And so, we all come into marriage expecting that I'm going to have more joy with this person than I did without them. And so sometimes the very expectation of the joy you're going to feel heightens the sense of resentment when you don't. In other words, if that gap gets too big, resentment creeps in very quickly. And again, resentment is anchored in this idea that I have been treated unfairly, and I'm being misjudged, and so I feel wronged. When I talk about resentment, I usually use the analogy of a scales, and that is when I'm wrong, the scales do this. And so to say I want to forgive somebody often feels like I'm just going to take this off and pretend it didn't happen. And so the problem with that, of course, is it doesn't feel just to anybody. Like, to just pretend it didn't happen. So resentment can be very tricky to deal with because a lot of people don't know how you actually resolve it, and that it goes way beyond simply, well, let's put that behind us and, act like it didn't happen.
That beautifully said. It sounds like the consequence. My next question was going to be, what's the consequence? And indeed, it sounds like it's the repelling, isn't it? About
it is.
Everything you just so eloquently said. Chris, let me ask you this then. I'm going to make a link and a little, I want to see your additional point of view on this. Do you think in the consequences that Marcus just described, when we are repelled from our partner because of these things that we build up in terms of resentment, would you agree that that tends to either create or bolster a belief that it's not possible anymore to have joy within the marriage?
Oh, certainly. The brain's an amplifier. So if we're not amplifying joy, we're not amplifying appreciation and the good stuff, then our brain's going to amplify the bad stuff. And so what happens is as you start amplifying bad stuff, pretty soon that just kind of comes to define your reality, because your brain always looks back to predict what's going to happen next down the road. And so when you look back and you've got all this resentment and all this pain and all this really unhappiness, your brain just says, well, this is just what's going to keep happening, and this is what I can expect. And so a certain level of despair starts to creep in over time. And a lot of couples feel that because it's like, well, it just seems like this is who we are and what we're doing. And so they kind of lose sight of joy and the good stuff. And so our hope writing this book was actually to give couples a language for these dynamics, but also give them some practice and some steps that they can take to actually change it. Because the good news is, as you would start practicing like appreciation, for example, then what happens is the resentment the volume gets turned down on the resentment. You start turning the volume up on the appreciation and the joy and the good stuff. And that's what we're after.
Absolutely. I think there's a link here to, so for example, I've been to a lot of Tony Robbins events, and one of his phrases is, wherever focus goes, energy flows, right? Now that then also links to, I'll say the non-religious Trinity. And what I mean by that is that you've got the mind, the body, and the spirit. And, if we just leave aside for a second what spirit might mean, because that might be, an individual thing in terms of what your beliefs are. From a mind and body perspective, and I'm sure I want to hear you take the link to the brain science again. We're focusing on something, right? It's the gap, it's the resentment that's building. And because we're focusing on it, literally from a Trinity point of view, the mind and the body, or the mind and emotion, they start to reinforce, don't they? So they reinforce this thing, and all of a sudden, that's why such things, it's the same with anything in life. On the flip side, on the positive, if you focus and feel, focus and feel, focus and feel, from a Trinity point of view, they just start to reinforce one another, mind, body, spirit, mind, body, spirit. And, that's, I think, that's why it can be the, I don't mean this too provocatively, but I think that's why it can be the death spiral of things, because they reinforce, don't they?
They do.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Go ahead, Chris. I'll jump in a minute.
Oh, I was just going to say they certainly do. And because of that amplifier that we have between our ears, what happens is we keep making these problems bigger and bigger. And when couples lack the practice, the habits, the skill to change the course of what's happening, then you feel stuck. And your emotional brain's also what in many ways oversees what's happening in your body. So your body's the canvas for what's happening in your brain. And so couples get into this rut, and it's a tough one. And Marcus, you probably have more to add to that.
Well, I mean, the analogy is very true in the sense that because it's brain's an amplifier, and because exactly what you're saying, energy does begin to flow in one direction or the other. Yeah. That's why we sometimes liken resentment and appreciation to magnets. It's like there's an energy that's actually drawing and an energy that's actually repelling. One of the things that happens when I get stuck in resentment is I begin to build a caricature in my mind about the person I'm married to. Right? And so this caricature in my mind is reinforced by stories that are true. It's like they mistreated me here. They were rude to me here. They did not show me respect here. They didn't. And I have a lot of true stories in my mind of ways in which I don't feel like I've been treated properly. Yeah. So what happens is I am essentially now with resentment training my brain to just think about those stories that reinforce my negative opinion of the person. Yeah. It's a little bit like the evening news, right? If you start with your storyline and your narrative tells you which facts to go looking for, right? So in the same way, when I have a narrative about my spouse or about my wife, my brain will naturally go looking for the facts that support that narrative. And that narrative will always support the caricature that I have of her, where I say things like, she always does that. She never does this. Why am I stuck like this? So resentment, that energy creates negative narratives, and then our brain naturally goes looking for true things that support that narrative. Whereas if I can train my brain in appreciation, then my brain learns to start looking for true things to appreciate. Yep. Right? The energy is now moving in a different direction, and I'm looking for what is there to appreciate in my wife. Yep. And once I've trained my brain that way, it starts looking for those things, and now that's the facts that it goes looking for in life. So it's not that I ignore the one, but I can literally train my brain to either be seeking the resentment facts or seeking the appreciation facts. And the goal here is to turn our brains into appreciation machines.
I love it.
And that's the beauty, Chris, of this plan is really it as couples start to practice that they literally feel the difference, and that's really when your brain really starts paying attention. Is you feel better when you're building joy, and that's a good thing.
Yes, exactly. Now, okay, so we built up the problem, right? And it's good. I want us to kind of get real with this, because I think that anyone that's married can relate to this either now or at some point throughout. And if we get real with it, then we can say, well, all right, what's the solution? As we transition towards that conversation, I'd like to ask you another transitional question. What's changed between now and falling in love with your partner? Let's talk about, pre-marriage, engagement, all of that, pre-kids, all these things. What's changed? What changes between falling in love versus 10 years down the track?
Well, just to start with, there are actually some very literal brain things that change. Chris is probably actually better at explaining dopamine and oxytocin and all the hormones that are going on in the brain. But quite literally, after about 2 years, your brain just stops producing quite as much of it about the person. It's just sort of a natural thing that happens within your brain. So becoming intentional about creating joy tells your brain to keep producing that stuff. Right. So in other words, and if we aren't intentional about building joy, that's just going to naturally fall off. And so, that's why people say, the honeymoon is over. And what they mean is those hormones aren't kicking in like they used to. It used to be all I had to do was think about my wife, and then I'd get happy and excited. But after 2 years of living together, you've been thinking so much about the person. You're just not generating the same kind of hormonal rush that it used to.
Yeah. And Chris, starting joy and sustaining joy are really two different things. It's easy to start joy in those early years, There's a lot of excitement, as Marcus said. There's a lot of dopamine. There's a lot of good stuff. But you know what? Sustaining joy over the long haul is hard. And as Marcus said, your brain changes with children. Your brain physically changes, and there's a reason why you know, most affairs happen when there's a pregnancy and the birth of a child. Like during that window is when statistically a lot of affairs happen, because what's happening is joy is now shifting to this new bundle of joy that's coming into the family. And you know what? It hurts when those joy levels start to drop. We actually really hurt.
Yep.
So sustaining joy is really it takes practice, it takes work, it takes, as we say in the book, habit, and that's really what we're trying to help couples understand.
Well, it's essential, right? And I'm so passionate about my commitment to my wife and my kids, and I'm passionate about that because I had a wonderful upbringing. I know what good old-fashioned family values actually feel like. I'm nourished. It makes me into a good person in this world now, and I want that for my kids. So there's also the vicious cycle thing about, you know, if you haven't had that, there's a few things in addition to, like, this is all beautiful foundation laying, right? In addition to what we were just talking about now, you've got two sort of things. You've got the temptations that can appear for people to want the thrill again, and that can manifest. You know, I think that can manifest both pre-marriage and during marriage too, because, you know, in pre-marriage stages, people get used to falling in love, and then, you know, they break up with the boyfriend or the girlfriend, and they just want the same again, and they get hooked, probably dopamine-wise and oxytocin-wise, on these things. And then the irony I find, because now I'm a committed husband, the irony I find if I see my single friends is that I just want to slap them in the face and say, guys, literally, this is the perfect person in front of you. What on earth are you doing? You told me you want to be a mother or a dad. You told me that you want this. You told me that they're amazing. It's kind of like, sorry to use the phrase, but it's grow up. But you don't know that you need to grow up yet until you've committed to marriage, because you don't know what it's like to walk down the aisle. You don't know what it's like to witness your wife giving birth to your children and to hold your child for the first time. And you know, I'm not religious, but I'll use the phrase, to feel the love of God wash over you like a wave when you hold your baby for the first time. That's commitment. That's something that, you know, I just only have to think of that, and I know just immediately how anchored I am to loving my family and not messing that up.
Yeah, that's right.
You definitely hit the nail on the head there, because as Chris will tell you, joy and maturity are directly related.
Yeah.
And if you think about it, I've got another book that I wrote called Rare Leadership, and I wrote this with Dr. Jim Wilder, who is a bit of a mentor to Chris and I both in terms of the brain science of all of this. And the idea behind maturity is that maturity is the ability to suffer well. And if you think about it, an infant, it doesn't take much suffering for them to melt down, blow up, you know. But when you get to a child stage, you can handle a little bit more than infancy, but it still doesn't take you much before you turn into somebody else. You lose your joy and you don't know how to get it back. The idea of being an adult is that I can handle hard things and still return to joy.
Yes.
In other words, my capacity to return to joy from upsetting emotions and upsetting circumstances to a certain extent defines my ability to live with maturity as an adult in the world. Now, I will also say that living like an adult isn't simply a choice. As you pointed out, you grew up in a very stable family. You had strong, loving attachments. You had really secure relationships. When people don't have that, in the language that Chris and I use, we call that trauma. And that is that they have been traumatized by the absence of what they needed. They didn't get the secure attachment. They didn't get the things they need. It's not that they were beaten or yelled at or, you know, called bad names necessarily, but they didn't get that secure attachment. They didn't get the love. They didn't get the nurturing. And now they've progressed, and now they're in the adult stage of life, but functionally they're still emotional infants. Right. And because of that, they don't know how to get back to joy from the upsetting things. And it does take secure attachment. This is where our Christian values come in, because we believe there's a secure attachment with God as well as a secure attachment with people that just, you know, increase your ability to do this.
And few things in our marriages will bring up pain other than bonding, right? Because bonding is where the best of the best happens relationally. Like when we're bonded, my brain is like, we are glued for life. You know, this is great. But when you've got that strong bond that starts to come together in your marriage, it also brings up all the stuff, all the unprocessed pain. And if we don't have the joy, as Marcus said, if we don't have that joy foundation and that maturity, then what happens is pain quickly becomes bigger, problems become bigger than the relationship. And that's dangerous. That's not good. It's not life-giving. So bonds are beautiful. They're awesome. That's what, you know, that's our brain loves a bonded relationship, but at the same time, it does bring up the pain from our relationship. So the good news is, if we have that, you know, if we have some joy that we can build, it'll give us the strength to navigate the hard stuff. But if we don't have that joy reserve, so to speak, then we quickly feel pretty overwhelmed by that stuff. So it's like, the good news is it gives us the best opportunity to get some healing and some closure to that hard stuff. But if we don't have the joy, then we quickly become overwhelmed by that. And that's where a lot of couples just want to give up because they don't quite know what to do.
Right, spot on. So it sounds like what I'm hearing is that, I completely agree with this, the joy framework is the foundational emotional fuel in order to be able to get, it's two things, is get through the things that come up, for one, in terms of, you know, the suffering, for example, or the conflict, or the you know, the trauma, things that we need to get over because it's our trauma, no one else's. It's coming up for us throughout the relationship. It's the fuel to get through that, but it's also the fuel to soar on high and just enjoy and, you know, have pleasure in the relationship again. Right. Okay. Also, like, I'd like to, I am a personal fan of Jordan Peterson, the psychologist, Canadian psychologist. He's not for everyone. I get that. He can be controversial, but I'm going to put my hand up and say I'm a fan. And one of the things that he, I believe he is a Christian, but he keeps his religious beliefs very private. And one of the things that really hit home for me, which I thought was psychologically spot on, so let me be careful in my terminology here. He said the psychological relevance of Jesus Christ bearing the cross is the ability to carry your load and walk through suffering and come out the other side.
No, that's actually a good point. We made the very same point in the book Rare Leadership, and that is that Jesus in many ways is the ultimate example of what maturity looks like.
Right.
And when you read through how he handled suffering, and that is, he remained relational with the people around him.
Yep.
He acted like himself, didn't turn into somebody else. He returned to joy. It says in Hebrews, it was for the joy set before him that he endured the cross. And because of that, he was able to endure hardship well. And so those are the 4 key characteristics of maturity as we define them in the other book. This book is on, is focusing on the idea. And I've heard some of Jordan Peterson's stuff, and he has a lot of really good things to say. I do think that there's that when it comes to joy specifically, most people treat joy like it's the icing on the cake in their marriage. And that is, I want to get through my marriage. I want to survive my marriage. You know, if I get some joy, that's a bonus. And they don't understand that it's actually the other way around. Right. And that is that if I don't have joy as the foundation of my marriage, if I can't get back to that joy repeatedly over and over again, the rest of it is just going to be really, really hard. Yeah. And so I find that sometimes the whole paradigm is just upside down for most people. And that, because you said it very eloquently, that joy really is the foundation. Whereas I think too many people treat it like it's the icing on the cake.
Very good distinction. Chris, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, that's so true. You know, joy is that foundation we built. Everything hangs on and is built on that foundation. And the good news is the part of your brain that really does joy can grow throughout your lifespan. So it's not limited by certain windows. I mean, there are growth spurts, you know, like 9 months is like the best window for the brain. But so we have growth spurts where it, you know, that soil is going to really grow some good stuff. But over our lifetime, the joy center can continue to grow in response to authentic, joyful interactions. So when those faces light up to see me, and you hear it in the voice tone, you see it in the body language, like that joy center is growing, with every joyful encounter. And so it's like going to the gym, and just working those muscles. I mean, that's what happens relationally. And in our marriages, this is the best opportunity to build joy. And so it's just, honestly, a little joy goes a long way. And as couples start to experience that, then there's a certain level of motivation that follows. Like, wow, if a little bit did this, what if we do this more often?
Yeah, exactly right. And I think then this links to my next question would you agree that at the mid to end game, it's both parties in the marriage that need to be committed to pursuing this? One person can perhaps lead the way and say, I really want to look at this. And maybe they can lead the way by being the change. I know that can sound cheesy, but it's true. Like if you train yourself to see joy, commit to it, then your partner may then be attracted to it. Like, tell me your take on that. Like, do both people have to be 100% committed? Can it start with, just one of them? How does that work in terms of the requirements to get towards this solution?
Go ahead, Marcus, you start.
No problem. We get that question a lot because, let's be honest, in most marriages, one person's trying a lot harder than the other. Yeah. And it's, in fact, there's kind of it's almost mathematical thing going on where the person who is more interested in power shows the least love, and the person who is showing the most love has the least power. And so you find this interesting inversion taking place here. And when I live my life out of fear, and I have a fear foundation to life instead of a joy foundation to life, then I will be tempted to opt for power over love. And even in my marriage, I'm going to tend to want to be the powerful person in the marriage more than I'm going to want to be the loving person in my marriage. And it's because I'm afraid of what will happen if I surrender that power. And so this is life in a nutshell. From a brain perspective, my brain will either run on the fuel of joy or it will run on the fuel of fear. If my brain is running on the fuel of fear, I will almost always opt for power over love.
That's right. And that's where couples get, it's a teeter-totter effect, and so one partner is going after power, the other partner is, going after love, and you're really missing each other. And you know what? Marx and I believe that perfect love casts out fear. And so, love and joy as an expression of love is more impactful. It's more enduring than fear. Fear is a powerful force. Don't get me wrong. I mean, your survival circuit responds in 1/10 of a second to something that we fear, but it's a horrible motivator over time. It just doesn't hold up well consistently over time. So, building joy and really expressing that relationally in our marriages goes a long way. But that is a dynamic a lot of couples, will navigate. One is usually the more motivated, and the other one's maybe more threatened. And so the motivated one's trying to do this dance to get the other person. And we kind of take the approach as, if you're on an airplane and they say, if you encounter turbulence, put that oxygen mask on you first. So when we hear from people in those dynamics, like, look, you got to put your oxygen mask on first. You've got to start building some joy. But when I work with couples, I often will tell them, if I'm working harder than you guys, we got a problem, because it really ultimately you need both parties to work together. But it's very common that you've got one who's highly motivated, trying to bring some transformation to their marriage. They just don't quite know how to do it.
Wow. Okay. Got goosebumps right now, especially with that. The distinction of fear can lead to the building of power, and then the opposition to love. If I was to add an image onto that for the visual people out there, I would say fear and power builds walls of a fortress, and love is the radiating energy akin to the sun.
Yes, that's right.
I'd like to give a shout out to my former personal coach, Anjani Amrit, who did some work with me. And she said, Chris, what's your vision of the future? And my immature first version of that was, I have this powerful castle fortress under which I'm so strong to the world. He's like, whoa. Nope. You are defending. You're not loving. Woo!
Wow. That's good.
Right?
That's true. But let's face it, if you don't have a secure foundation to life, and anxiety may be the single biggest emotional problem in our world today.
Right.
Yeah. And one of the reasons for that is that we have so few secure attachments in our lives.
Mm.
When I don't have a secure attachments, then I am facing all of these hard things all by myself.
That's right.
And that's why marriage can be tough, is like if you feel all alone in your marriage, and you feel like the double weight, like I'm handling the weight of all these things in my life, and now I'm handling it alone, and I got to take care of this person too. So the idea of building your own joy, even if the other person won't, is to a certain extent a survival technique. And that is, you learn that if I'm going to have the capacity to do anything productive, I'm going to need to grow my own joy.
Yep.
So we talk about how to do that, but ideally you want to see, would you participate with me? And let's see if we can't grow joy together. And that's the goal, because very few, people who are actually committed to their marriage are going to say, no, I don't want any joy. I mean, it's,
would you like some candy? No, I don't want any. Yeah, brilliant. And it's called Self-Esteem for a reason. And my wife and I have done a podcast on self-care and the importance of self-care. And it's one of the many mechanisms. But I'm thrilled by this conversation because the solution is in your book, and the wisdom that specifically applies to the marriage framework. In a broader context to talking about life and meaning and how we piece it all together. The reason I do this podcast is because I want people to be able to see the dots, connect the lines, and see that actually everything is holistically connected, whether that be your own self-care, your own attitude to your marriage, your own attitude to your career. You can't escape it. I think this idea, one of the reasons in my mind that we have so much anxiety in modern day culture is because we have the falsity of separation. And actually, I think that's a beautiful place where religion or spirituality, whatever your thing is, or even connection to nature, just something connected to a higher thing that's beyond you. And you feel connected to that. That's part of the way that you feel love for your own self, regardless of what's happening in the world. But if we look at these little things here, then we get this sense of digital separation, and it's just not the case. But we need to get ourselves off our proverbial bottoms and into the world to experience that, whether that be religion, spirituality, nature. Just connect.
You're correct in the sense that connection is key. Yeah, connection. Any type of connection like you've described is going to help you feel more grounded. So
yeah, we're relational beings, right? I mean,
yes,
we're made for we're for relationships. That's what your brain is really after, and we see ourselves in the faces of other people who are looking at us. So when I am first growing in those early years of life, I learn about myself through the faces that are looking at me. And if those faces are lighting up to see me, that's going to help create that secure foundation that Marcus is talking about. If those faces are distracted, angry, disgusted, then I assume there's something wrong with me because look at how you're looking at me, right? So those faces are mirrors in terms of how we see ourselves. And the beauty is when it's a joyful expression growing up, then we get married and hey, there's going to be more joy to go around. It's beautiful. But when we don't quite have that firm foundation, then what happens is, we feel ill-equipped, unprepared, overwhelmed. And so Marcus and I really put this book together hoping that couples would, here's some very practical steps you can do to start building joy today.
Now, I want people to buy your book, so don't give away all the answers. Right. But nevertheless, let me ask you this: can you give us some of the insight to the 4 habits and the solutions that you provide through the book?
Certainly, I organize them around the acrostic PLAN, just to make them easy to remember. And that is, we need to have a plan for shrinking the joy gap. And the 4 habits, I'm happy to tell you what they are, because the point here is practicing them, and it is playing together. And one of the things that happens when you become a parent is a lot of times you have so much energy going into your work, so much energy going to parenting, and your marriage relationship quickly becomes like a business partnership. And it's like we're managing our family, who's going to take care of this, who's going to take care of that, did you remember this, did you remember that? If you're not careful, your bed turns into a boardroom. It's like we go to bed at night and it's like, we're conducting business in bed and then rolling over and saying, so you want to have sex now? It's like it doesn't really connect that way. So playing together means is that you want to have a strong friendship foundation to your marriage and your relationship. So part of being friends is somebody you like to play with. and not losing that. So scheduling it in and continuing to build the playful points of connection that you have with one another. So you don't have to have all the same hobbies, but you need to appreciate the other person's hobbies so that you can share their joy about them.
Yes.
Right. So if your wife is really into some type of artwork, and she says, "Oh, look at this. This is so great," but you're not into that kind of artwork, it just crushes her when you say, "Yeah, that's nice. Whatever," So just learning to share the other person's joy and their playfulness and like, "Oh, that's so great," and enter into it with them is a form of playing together. And sex goes under play as well. One of the problems we have in our world today, I believe, is that the pornography explosion due to the internet has turned sex into a performance for most people rather than a relational experience. And so what they end up happening is instead of bonding, people, I've talked to married couples who come away feeling dirty after sex instead of feeling bonded.
Right.
And this isn't really a question of technique so much as are we being relational? Mm-hmm. And are we in this to build our bond relationally, or are we just in it for what I get out of it? So that goes under the playfulness as well. Mm-hmm. Like we have mentioned one couple in there who just call their bed the playground. That's what they call.
I love that. That's fun.
Yeah. Right. It kind of keep the idea of what's important here. Yep. The L is listening for emotion, and this goes back to the brain, and that is my brain will either listen for emotions or problems. So if I'm right, my right brain is going to tend to listen for emotions. My left brain is going to tend to listen for problems. So a lot of us people who have gotten into leadership because we're problem solvers,
yep,
we're very good at listening for what the problem is. And we will stop listening as soon as we think we understand what the problem is and how to fix it.
Oh, so true, especially for men. Sorry to say, I'm going to call it right out. Men are from Mars, women are from Venus. That great book. Yeah. Like, maybe I'm the cliche man, I don't know, but I think a lot of men out there are very guilty of hearing what our beautiful wives are telling us, and then we go, right, well, you need to do this then. Done. Yeah. Like, finish listening, solution. And they always push back, in my experience, push back and like, you're not listening to me, you're not hearing, I don't want solutions. Stop trying to solve my problems. Just feel me and connect with me.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Then the A is appreciation, as you might imagine. If the two strongest forces are resentment and appreciation, then we need to be intentional about that. And then the last one is rhythm, and the idea of nurturing rhythm.
Okay.
The idea of knowing what you can count on relationally. Some of these countries like Denmark and Switzerland have scored really high on the happiness meter. And one of the reasons for that, if you look at those cultures, is they're very relational cultures.
Right.
It's very common for whole families to get together every weekend. Your cousins, your aunts and uncles. There's multi-generational community. You don't go through anything alone, right? Because your family's going to be there. You're going to have people to share this with you. You're routinely getting together with friends. And that relational rhythm to life is what we're talking about. A lot of times when we get married, we lose the relational rhythm in our life. And again, it becomes all about problem solving and all about the business of marriage. And we can lose that. So the idea of some suggestions on how do we nurture a rhythm in our marriage is the last point.
Yeah. Sorry, Chris.
Go, Chris. Yeah, go.
These habits, if we have these habits, then the joy is going to blossom. When we lack these habits and these skills, then we compensate in some way, shape, or form. And it's usually non-relational. So if I'm not building appreciation, as Marcus said, then there's going to be a weed is going to grow in this garden if I don't keep an eye on what's happening there. So that's where these weeds like resentment will grow in. So the beauty is, when couples actually practice these together, they amplify joy. They start to smile again, get a little sparkle in their eyes when they see each other. Though that's the sweetness of our marriages. And then, we remember why we got married in the first place. Because, as Marcus says in the book, we believe we'd have more joy together than apart.
Yep, exactly. I mean, you've made it pragmatic, brain science based, and outcome driven. That you only becomes more reinforcing, which is why it truly is a guide, and that's wonderful. Wow. Okay, these are great. I love the how applicable these things can be. They can be applied, in real life. Wonderful. And just to add to the rhythm thing as well, I'd like to make a little intellectual link to maturity and adulthood, because Marcus, we talked about, what it means to be an adult, right? To be able to kind of go through certain things. I would like to make a link between rhythm and maturity there, because one of the things that an immature attitude can take is that I must always get gratification now. And one of the realities of marriage is that there are all these other things that come into the equation where it's not about us anymore, whether you be the husband or the wife. It's not about us anymore. It's about the unit, the we, your partner, what the kids need, all these things that are, yes, you're important and you've got to look after yourself and bring it. So of course you matter, but it's also not about you. Right. So, and a lot of people don't like to hear that because it's always about me and, in the social media generation. But here's my point with rhythm. Of course it's about you too, but it's going to come in rhythms, and rhythms have ebbs and flows. And one of the reliability things, which I think Marcus is so astute comparing to different cultures, in the practical element of your relationship with your husband and wife, having a date night. If you can rely on the fact that you're going to have a date night, X regularity, whether that be once a week, once a month, every Friday, and it's there. And I think what that gives is that personal belief that rhythm is going to flow back to you because you give so much.
No, I'm actually quite impressed with your grasp on maturity there, Chris.
Yeah,
I think that the way we describe it is again, infants don't know what they need. They're relying on you to take care of them, right? So the one thing an infant really excels at is fussing, letting you know they're upset.
Yep.
And so there's some of us who get to older age, and that's still the only thing we're really good at, is letting people know we're upset. And so when you go on social media, what you're seeing on full display there for the most part is infant level maturity.
Yes, right.
And that is people who really only know how to let some other people know they are upset and somebody ought to do something about this. That's infant level maturity. Child level maturity says, well, I can take care of me, but I can't take care of you. So the child in marriage is like, well, I'm in this marriage to get what I need out of it. Right. So that means I married you because I thought I would be better off, because you do such a good job of taking care of me.
Yep.
So that's the child attitude to marriage. What you just described is the adult approach to marriage. And so the child says, I can take care of me. The adult says, I can be myself with you and take care of us. Like I can take care of two people at the same time. I can do this. So there is that natural progression that is very well stated there in terms of what marriage does and how maturity affects it.
Yeah, it's huge. Just to have that language is so helpful for couples.
Isn't this such a perfect and so relevant juxtaposition to a social media generation that we live in? Because I guarantee you two things about social media. Algorithmically, it's an echo chamber. We put algorithms share your posts with things that other people validate your post with. It's a blooming echo chamber, right? There's a reason that whether you're for this politics or against this politics or this belief system or this whatever, it's an echo chamber. So not only is it an echo chamber, it's also something that is the life that we want to present, which is always the perfect version. It's just rare people that really go fully vulnerable, right? In terms of, having a slightly bad day, except when maybe they're angry about something, and then guess what? The echo chamber validates back to them. But again, it's instant. So not only can you get it instantly, which is the thing we just talked about maturity-wise, it's also an echo chamber. So it's like, boom, whatever you want, whether you're angry, mad, perfect, why man, I got the perfect lifestyle with the glass of wine on the balcony and everyone's happy or whatever it is. Not only can I go post, it's like, boom, echo chamber. And that's exactly the opposite of what marriage is. And I think I'd like to make another link here. And Chris, I want you to dive in here because I'm finding this all fascinating. Let's bring in privacy. Let's talk about privacy and joy and marriage, because my personal value on that is that very important to remember that it's between two people. Marriage is between two people, and it's very important there's a sacredness to that, I feel. But Chris, I'm going to have your take on that.
Oh yeah, certainly. And where couples get themselves in a lot of trouble is when our joy levels drop.
Yes.
And my brain does not like it when those joy levels drop, right? I feel alone. And the moment I feel alone, that creates the worst conditions for my brain to process pain. So what happens then when I have somebody at work who lights up to see me and, she has a sparkle in her eye, when I go to the water cooler, my brain says, hey, look at that. Now there's somebody. So in our marriages, we have to, we want to fiercely protect our joy levels. Like I would not go to bed with my stove on in the kitchen, right? I wouldn't go to bed with my stove on. But yet there's times I've gone to bed and not in a joyful place with my wife. And you know what? That's bad. You know, there's from stress hormones to all kinds of stuff with the relationship. So we want to fiercely protect these joy levels in our marriages. You know, you won't go to bed with the stove on. Let's not go to bed out of joy. Let's do everything we can, at least to get it so we can at least share the bed together for the night. And doesn't mean we're going to be able to resolve the problem necessarily, but let's at least try to get back to that relational mode where we can, have a spark of joy, maybe.
Absolutely. And I think for couples that, okay, I'm going to be fully authentic here and say there have been one or two times where we may have had a row, and what it can lead to is one of the persons going, I'm not going to name who it was, it doesn't matter, choosing to sleep on the couch, right? Now, this is so rare. But what happens in that moment is that it's kind of like you said, I give up on this right now. I give up. And again, that's the commitment thing. And also the working through it. So, again, there's a maturing process throughout that journey, isn't there? You become better at realizing that, no, we always need to go to bed, at least, being, as close to joy or just willing to be with each other. We've got to do that because that's crucial. Now, Marcus, what's your take on privacy? I want to hear your take on the privacy thing as well.
Well, in terms of privacy related to your emotions, or I'm not quite sure what.
Okay, so it's just my opinion, but I want to see if there's a link here.
Okay.
Because we're contrasting a few things. We're contrasting instant gratification of social media. We're contrasting the foundational work of joy and what it means, including going to bed, on good terms with each other. What about privacy in this world? Because, if we can easily, especially if we're in the opposite end of the spectrum, we can go to other things in life, either seeking for the echo chamber or seeking to be heard because is there a violation of privacy in those moments? And should the privacy of what you're going through in your marriage be treated as sacred as possible?
Yeah, in the sense, let's put it this way. Not everybody is deserving of trust.
Right.
Okay, so I'm very careful how much vulnerability I have with whom.
Right.
Okay. And so when I preach in a church, for example, I'll say there's a reason why I don't put a mic up here and say, let's everybody come up and share your deepest, darkest secret with everyone in the room.
Right.
Because you can't trust everybody in the room with that information.
Right.
Now, that doesn't mean that there isn't somebody that you need to trust with that information, that there's got to be somebody out there to talk to. And so that's why you have your inner circle of people that you trust with the closest things. And then you're increasingly vulnerable with people who can handle it. And this comes right back to maturity, because as an adult, I'm not going to share as a father. I have to be careful how much weight I put on my infant or my children, right? Once they become adults, I can entrust them with more weight.
Right.
But I actually need to protect them from some of that. In the same way, part of what we do with privacy is we're doing it out of protection for that person as much as we're doing it out of protection for ourselves. And that we want that person not to have to handle more weight than they can handle. That's going to put them beyond their capacity and now make them have to make decisions they aren't really ready to make.
Yep. Good point. I like that. Very, very nicely said. Let's go on to a couple of round off questions. In terms of the inspiration, you guys have known each other for 10 years. What was the inspiration and reasoning that you chose to co-author the book? How did that come about?
Well, Marcus is a smart guy, and the moment
he's all right. He's a bit handsome too. He's pretty handsome too. He's all right. He's all right.
Such a good guy. So when he asked me to jump in on this book, I just this is Marcus we're talking about. So awesome. Now, actually, Marcus and I have been colleagues for a very long time. He's someone I highly respect, and actually, it was our friend Jim Wilder that tapped Marcus on the shoulder for this book and said, Marcus, hey, here's an idea for a book. Would you be interested? And then Marcus tapped me on the shoulder and said, hey, Chris, would you be interested in partnering with me on this book? And so,
it's a natural partnership. And then my strength is explaining things.
Okay.
And Chris's strength is creating exercises for them. And so it's a very natural partnership. So the exercises in the book Chris developed, and he practiced them with his wife and, tried them all out. And so my goal was to try to take these concepts we've been learning and package them in a way that are transferable and replicatable. And Chris's task was then to take these into something that you could do in 15-minute increments. Here's 15 minutes of these exercises will grow these skills and will turn into these habits. And so that's why the partnership worked out so well.
Yeah, and Chris, we're both practical. You know, Marcus and I both, we want something that people can hold in their hands, take home, and do something with it. So it was a high value for us to just have a resource available for couples that they can put into practice immediately, and you know, just a very practical resource to get some joy started.
Nicely said. Great combination of strengths there. Have you ever considered, or now that you've written books, right? You know, it's interesting, the journey of an author, isn't it? Because as soon as you've got that one out, and we're here to talk about this concept here today in your book, but out of interest, are any other future inspirations, you know, bubbling over in those minds of yours?
Well, Marcus is already working on his next book. Marcus, you want to share that?
Well, it's kind of funny. The publisher asks for books, right? As you may know, it's like once you write one that actually sells a few copies, they want more. So now they start to ask, and so I actually just sent 5 book ideas to our publisher, and they range from one was actually called the X Factor in Marriage,
nice.
and the X Factor in Marriage is maturity, which we've been talking quite a bit about here. So to lay that out. Another book idea was called Loving the Oppressed, and it's a look at what does the Bible say about dealing with people who are oppressed. Can that be misunderstood and misapplied? What is our calling in life when it comes to people like this? So that's on a very totally different, you know, area of life. And then we've got trying to take the Rare Leadership book that was written and put it into a smaller, directly available kind of brain science foundation, similar to what we've done with the marriage book, make it a very accessible book. It's been well received in corporate circles and even in some government circles, because the core idea is that the number one crisis in leadership we have today is actually immaturity. And somebody wrote years ago an article in the Harvard Business Review, said we need more mature leaders. And that's kind of the idea of this book, is what does that look like? What does it look like what would mature leadership look like in practice? So we have, there's quite a few more plugging away at.
Well, we have no shortage of ideas, Chris. Our minds are always busy thinking about these things. It's something we both highly enjoy.
Oh, absolutely. And it's the writing process, whether that be a book, a blog, even making a video and sharing that with someone. It's the process of doing it. That's where the clarity comes, and that's why it's so important to journal, even on a personal level, for example, or have a diary. Right. Cool. Well, Marcus Warner and Chris M Coursey, it really has been a fascinating conversation about not only the 4 habits of joy within marriage, but also maturity and how we can have a very sensible and real conversation about what life is. And it, you know, I really do encourage these types of conversations, because it doesn't matter what your faith is, what your beliefs are in certain areas. We just got to all learn from each other. So, you know, this is brilliant. Where can people find this book? This is by Moody's Publishers, I believe. And where's the best place for people to get that online?
Yeah, we have a happyhappy.org.
Happy Marriage.
Happy Marriage. Thank you. Yes, that is the website. There's great couples resource on there, and events, all kinds of good stuff on that. happymarriage.org.
happymarriage.org. And if the people want to buy a copy of the book,
they can get it almost anywhere, but they can go to Chris runs Thrive Today. They can get it at his website, and I'm at Deeper Walk International. They can get it there. They can also just go to Amazon. So it's available about anywhere.
Fantastic. The book is called, for those listening, The 4 Habits of Joy-Filled Marriages. The 4 Habits of Joy-Filled Marriages. Marcus Warner, Chris M Coursey, thank you for this insightful conversation today, and all the best with the work, the fabulous and important work that you're doing in the world.
Thank you, Chris. It's been a joy. Thank you.
It's been a pleasure. It's a pleasure to meet you, Chris.
Yeah.
Likewise, gents.